Okay, this is Gary. And Gary, there you are.
There I am. I'm moving again because I keep losing internet. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Now we get your door, the portal to
There, wait,
creativity.
I'll do it this way, and then you can get trees. There, how's that?
Trees and blue skies. So may I now introduce you? Although I feel we kind of,
And
don't we all feel like we know Gary now? Gary Barwin is a writer, composer, visual and multidisciplinary artist, and author of 24 books of poetry, fiction, and books for children. There are too many awards to list for this man, because he is also the publisher of Seraph of Nottingham Editions. He is an active literary organizer and has been writer in residence at several libraries and universities. Gary is coming to us live, not just from one location, but he's been in 3 locations in Hamilton, Ontario. And I was hoping that you would be under a beech tree, like Barwin under beech, because that would so fulfill my love of alliteration. But it's okay, you're on a porch. And so, Gary, I give to you the Zoom stage.
thank you very much. It's very nice to see you all. Some I just see, some of them I see your names, and some I just see your the kind of technology. Somebody's a Galaxy A5, so welcome to the Galaxy. It's really great to be able to connect like this. I was thinking about just the need for connection and for communication, and thinking about that in relationship to nature. There was I read an article. I read a quotation by Margaret Mead, and she was saying, someone was asking her, when did humans evolve? So she's an anthropologist, and she said, well, she feels that, the thing, is it language? Is it fire? What is it? And she was saying, well, the first time they found a femur that was broken and that had been repaired. And she said that we became human when we could heal, we could look after others, we could because it was the first time that normally if an animal breaks a limb, they die. But in this case, a human looked after another human, and they survived, and that was a mark of being human. And so I guess I was thinking about that, but now we're sort of onto this next stage of, now we actually have to look after the human, but look after the earth, I guess. Expanding on that, that's sort of another kind of level. So I was also thinking about and so also thinking about, in terms of human development, I think the first thing that one of the first development in human consciousness was, we learned that we learned about ourselves, that we were human, that we were separate from human, that we separate from nature, that we had a consciousness, we had a personhood, we were people. So then we learned that we were separate. We had a life, and life had boundaries. A squirrel doesn't really think about its squirrel life and the end of its squirrel life. But so now we're also on the next stage, where we're also learning that we're not apart from nature, that we actually are connected to nature, that our lives are inextricably bound to nature. Somebody posted today on Twitter, it was a picture of the earth, and they were saying, it's like I was born here, this is where I was raised, and which I thought was really, really lovely. So I was been thinking about, in terms of talking about what in fact is nature. Where are the boundaries? When I was a teenager, I used to play music at the mall at the middle of the night. And the place I'd play, it was like in this loading dock. I'd be playing saxophone in this loading dock because it's echoed really nicely, and I could play at 3 in the morning. And I would look out on the parking lot where there were those traffic islands. So they're surrounded by a curb, and there's grass, maybe one tree in the middle. So is that nature, or is that not nature? So I kind of love that it's got grass, it's got a tree, everything else has been raised, but it's just this one little survival. And is that nature or is that not nature? So we work together in because obviously a river, a beautiful flowing river and pine trees and beaches and all of that, that is that's nature. But what about, like, where are the boundaries of what's nature, and what is our responsibility? So with that, I'm going to read you a poem about nature and what is nature and what is not, being that I'm in Hamilton, Ontario, close to the sidewalk. So this is called Nature Poem. Even on the sidewalk, I want to be a nature poet. This summer light is nature, so is the air and the rain-soaked road. Scooping up after my dog, the bag warm as my dog's insides, is nature. Yes, it's nature inside and out here in Hamilton, Ontario. Nature inside and out, this poem. Yeah, I mean, I guess I've just been thinking about what, you know, as I'm quarantining, what is nature, and what do I, and I have this urge to go outside, go into the woods and connect. And I guess for me, writing is about that kind of connection. It is about connecting with the world. It's connecting with, I mean, if I could write literature for trees, I would definitely write literature for trees. They're both a great audience and not a great audience. They give very slow feedback, but you know, it's there. But I do want to, when I was a kid, I used to go out, the same teenager, and I would get my little recorder, and I'd go into the woods, and I'd pretend I was an elf, and I would jump up and down, dancing down the wood, playing recorder, pretending to be an elf. And in a way, that was, I mean, it was reflecting my, you know, my teenage machismo, but it was also about connecting, like wanting to go out into the world and connect through art, connect through making music. I used to bring my little typewriter. I got a typewriter for my bar mitzvah, this little Olivetti, and I used to take it out. It's a little manual typewriter, and put it on the stump and type away. And again, that was about going into the world and connecting with the world, connecting with nature. And of course, I also want to go and connect with people, and connect with people about nature, and how do we reckon with ourselves, our place in the universe, in the world, both so I mean, it's about communication and taking care of each other, but also taking care of the world, which is also us, right? There's not really any outside. It's all we're soaking in it, Madge, as the old commercial used to say. Like, it's all part of where we're at. I've got the other thing I wanted to talk about why we're not squirrels, are talking about making, so, and in terms of connection, is how we as humans make conscious community, how we make a and conscious connection. I don't know that squirrels form a conscious community. They have their own squirrel culture, and they have their own connection, but whether it's a conscious one or not, we need to, but we also consciously do that. And then ideally listen for the voices that are not immediately apparent to us, and try and reach out for greater connection. I have another poem I'd like to read. Again, thinking about what we walk in the city, and again, what is nature, what is not nature. I remember I live around the university in Hamilton, and often I think it's students take grocery carts, and they leave them all over the place. They go grocery shopping, they take these carts, and they just leave them in alleyways, and sometimes if you're in a ravine, if you go walking in the woods, and they look sort of plaintive, these lost grocery carts, right? They just look, and they sort of look like, to me, they look like animals. They have a sort of a shape of like a deer or something, and sometimes I see them kind of quietly peeking out of an alleyway, or just sort of sitting there out on a field, sort of like a little bit quiet and stunned the way a deer would. And also lately, in my backyard, my front yard, here's my front yard. I've come across deer there, and so it's deer in a place where I wouldn't expect, like my front yard, and grocery carts in a place I wouldn't expect, like the woods. And I was thinking that there's somehow something similar, that they're connected, and they both seem between two worlds and sort of numinous, sort of magical. A deer always seems magical because it's so quiet and it looks so intently, and it's so saturated with mythology. And I think a grocery cart is another kind of icon of the modern world, and it's silvery and kind of appealing and quiet. And so I wrote this poem called Shopping for Deer. I went shopping for deer. There were no deer. The shopping cart became the deer. I brought it home, climbed inside, and turned off the lights. The seasons changed. I lived on Earth. Sometimes the bright sun shone. I became old. When I die, I will remember the deer. I will remember its wheels and antlers. I will remember its flesh and lightning, its womb of silver bones. I wonder if my neighbors are thinking, oh, there goes Gary. He's talking to himself. He's talking to his computer on the porch again. It's like, oh yeah, that guy. I was once in a coffee shop, and I was working on a novel, and I was working on dialogue, and I was doing this and that, and I was reading it out loud, and then I looked around, and somebody was sitting beside me, watching me talk, doing this dialogue and moving. Luckily, it was a writer, so she sort of understood, kind of. She smiled at me indulgently, but maybe they're thinking that now, as I'm here talking, it's people used to whistle and sing to themselves when they would walk around, kind of communicate to the world. But now it's looked on as kind of eccentric to do that. I feel, I sing the Hallelujah chorus at the bank all the time, and it works. So I'm going to read another poem. It's another deer poem. Again, I find deer fascinating, and I'm thinking a lot about deer. Well, both because deer come in as a kind of sign of wildness, but we have a long connection to deer. But also, I guess I find certain animals, for me, they sort of symbolize, like, it's almost like a portal to the mysterious, which is sort of a way into kind of that idea of nature as something numinous or sacred or surprising, or taking you outside of the limitations of human concerns and awareness, I guess. And even the antlers, which are like roots growing up, or like trees, and then the way they bifurcate, they're sort of fractal, and they seem sort of like almost like lightning, or like maybe constellations, star constellations, or they just have this very a lot of resonant images, and feel like there's some kind of communication. Of course, they're also about growth, and really I know that mostly they're about, like, male deer showing off and clunking each other on the head and showing how tremendous, but I'm going to pretend that it's not that. And there's this other part, and you're seeing, they're so profoundly other, I guess, when you look at a deer, and that really is always, I guess, that's something that really interests me about, about writing, but also about nature writing, about trying to have a sense of something that is something that's other, something that's outside the limitations of my human awareness, I guess. And so I keep a blog, and this, I once posted an image of a deer upside down with the antlers as if they were roots in the ground, and which you think is fairly innocuous, but I had so many people comment, and they were so mad at me that I could post such an outrageous picture of this inverted deer. It really irked people. So I wrote a poem about it, because I just thought more about that image of deer roots, roots looking like antlers, and thinking about, again, like deer, something more mysterious, about just taking something how it points to things and how how it might be inverted. It would just have a different relationship to the world. Like, I guess, I hope a poem leads you to have. Inverting the Deer. The deer of this earth are doubly inverted. Once, and their antlers point toward the center. The antlers of inverted deer point towards the antlers of every other inverted deer. Once again, and their antlers point towards space. Do not touch deer, and you will not touch deer. Do not walk on deer, and you will not walk on deer. Do not mourn deer when you are dying, though their noses are against the glass. Do not mourn deer when you are dying, though their minds are edgeless. Fish swim around the remembered hooves of deer. They understand. They know. Antlers grow toward the deer, which grow toward the ground. The wind rustles the hair of deer. The deer are a harp. When the first trees, whose home was the water, whose home was the sky, began to die, the deer did not know what to do. And so, their smooth heads wrinkling, their hooves beating the water, their hooves beating the air, they ran through the world, weeping, until they planted the branches and crossed the world, trees growing like memories from the tops of old televisions, from the tops of old brown heads. There is only one deer, and it is larger than sky. The deer has but one season, and the hunters wait for it. After a great while, the hunters become trees, and bullets lose their green. Night falls in the skyless rivers, and deer's breath warms the sky. I saw late night talk shows are a pause and then pausing for tremendous applause. I'm just trying to look. I'm just like Galaxy A5 is. I'm just looking for Galaxy A5 to look rapturous. It's just, but still, Galaxy A5 just looks Helvetica to me. There we go. Janet Joy is doing that. Yes, excellent. I'm a poet. I just need. My daughter's walking the dog behind me. See, you can see there's my numinous. Can you see my numinous happy dog? I don't know if you can. My dog is called Happy. I used to think dogs were numinous and also portals into the other world until I had one. And it seems to be mostly that they're though lovely, they're sort of they're needy and codependent as humans are, I think. Which is it's a beautiful thing in its own way, right? So I've got another poem I'd like to read. Man, there's a lot of poems in this poetry reading. This one is about, there's a whole tradition of contemporary poets doing variations on a very old poem, on a haiku by Basho. I guess it's the most famous haiku in the world. It's the one about the frog jumping into the pond. So it's basically old pond, water sound, a frog leaps in, or old pond, water sound, a frog leaps in. So it's so simple. It's just about this frog jumping into a pond, and the poet apprehending this single moment, this sound, and I guess it's about in haiku they call it the aha moment, where it's just this apprehension of just the thisness of the world, that you're here, you are in this time, in this particular moment, surrounded by all the world, surrounded by the whole all of creation, I guess. And so it's so incredibly simple, but really beautiful. There's a really lovely version. The simplest translation I know about is by the Canadian poet B.P. Nichol, and his translation is just the letter Q. So it's just the circle is the old pond, and then this capital Q, and then the little line is the path of the frog jumping into the middle of the O part of the Q, and that's like the apprehension of just this moment. And I guess because it's so simple, it's just got these three simple parts, that there's been a tradition of writing translations of this in a variety of contemporary forms. With a friend of mine, Derek Bellier, a writer, we wrote a whole book of these translations. Actually, once I was in Japan, and I was doing a reading at the Canadian consulate, I sort of set this reading up. We happened to be in Japan. I thought that'd be cool. I've got this book of haiku. And so they said, great, we'll invite people. So it was great. They invited people. They had a translator. And then they introduced me to these two little old men who were like 197 years old each. And they said, Gary, here you are coming to talk about, you're a Canadian, come to talk about haiku in Japan. No imposter syndrome there. And we'd like you to introduce you to this man who is head of the Tokyo Haiku Society, and this other man who's head of the Japanese Haiku Society. And so I was, of course, entirely petrified, having to, bringing coals to Newcastle, as it were. And but they were lovely, as long as I understood that the frogs in the Japanese poems were not these big brash bullfrogs that are like North American ones. They were these delicate Japanese ones. They were cool, as long as I, whatever crazy North American hijinks I got up to, as long as I respected the form and understood it's this venerable form, which I did. And the only thing that corrected me in my talk was I made a reference somehow to a Walt Disney character, and I got the wrong one, and they corrected me. So I thought that was so perfectly Japanese. So here's my poem. Fragments from the Frag Pool. A frog jumps into a pond the size of itself. A frog jumps. The division of pond and frog breaks down. The pond is identical in size and shape to the frog. In its formative stages, the pond was a drop of water. Seeing it suddenly glisten, one could easily have mistaken it for a tadpole. The pond leaps, surrounding the frog like a raincoat. It is believed that the pond opened before the actual and apparently sudden impact of the frog. As the frog ponds, the pond frogs. The moment of illumination is not that instant when the frog hits the surface of the pond. It is that moment when the frog knows it is going to leap. That moment when the pond prepares to open. It is that moment when the path between frog and pond first finds its form, arching from lily pad to the filigreed edge of broken meniscus. We are deceived by the sound of water. So I guess the other thing about that poem that I really like, my poem, which is well crafted and insightful and really brilliant. Well, the thing about the original Basho one is it's about that moment, but it's also about our consciousness of it. So my poem tries to consider like how we feel before we hear this and how we feel after this, and what is our, how we become the moment, or how the moment is reflected in our own awareness, and to try and disentangle that, which I guess is what that's what we do in nature, right? To try and understand, who we are in relationship to nature, and how and what nature is in relationship to us. I read an article this morning. It was by a Globe writer, Marshall Liederman, and she was talking about Michael Christie's novel, which his name has now escaped me. Anyway, his novel was I think it was just shortlisted for the Giller, and he had, I guess, above his desk, he had a little sign that said "Trees Warp Time," which I really loved. Trees, how do trees warp time? Whose time? They don't warp trees' time, they warp our time, right? And so just to think about a tree and how long it lasts, and what has happened during the life of that tree, and what will happen after our life, and while the tree still continues. Once, when my grandparents died, I was at my parents' house, and there was a little tree in the front yard, and a neighbor came over to me, and I was there with my son, and my son was small, who had just lost his great grandfather, and the neighbor came up and said, "See that little tree? See this enormous tree? That tree was little when I was your age, when I was the same height as this, and now 60 years later, this tree is, and it's this enormous towering tree, and I still things stay, and your grandparents will are like that tree. Their kind of memory will be there, and they live and time is this larger than life kind of thing." It was somehow consoling to think of that. So it's consoled my my son. I mean, then later on, he kicked the tree, and no, he didn't. But just to try and think about us in relationship to well, to space, of course, but also in relationship to time. And so I guess that's one of the things that I think about with how to write, how to relate, how to include time in the writing that I'm doing when I'm thinking about nature. And on the subject of that, I will read one more poem. So we have, and the subject of time. So I'm reading this one for Janet Joy because we did an event, the Reading Line, where we were, where Janet Joy arranged. It was a reading series that took place all the way along Bloor Street, and everybody rode their bicycle from one place to the other. So there's this whole pile of bicyclists would ride to different stops, and at these different stops there would be writers reading. And I was at Spadina and Bloor. It was a great spot, except the moment they got there was a deluge. It just bucketed rain. It was just complete. We all got entirely and utterly drenched. So I was going to read a beautiful introspective poem about about connection in the city, but instead I read this because of the weather. Eclogging. Nature, I hate you and your petty flummoxing of the butterfly's wing dust. Your immersive credo is irritating. Your pneumatic pontificating does nothing to assuage the oxidizing Chevy of the red-shifted sub-dwarf sternum thumper that is upper management and my heart. The unrelenting entropic cadenza of your rococo filibustering. Your cantankerous obfuscations like winter or autumn are like the brain's catamaran, an oxymoron or an oxytocin. The exact taxonomy unclear but proximate to the irradiated toxins of the deoxyribonucleic aficionados of the spirographic light bright drive-through of the 21st century. Your tune-carrying maw is a vector for collusion. Your vainglorious banquet of pockets, numinous, piping, populous, and astringently verdant with acquisitive glimmer. Nature, you brindled mixmaster, tastemaker, gene marker, your precipitous pox of clouds, no-seum nano-deer, ocean flux of quiddity and riboflavin, the Catholic prestidigitations of your carbonara miracles, the peroxided flux of your tuskless barnacles, make me your amanuensis only, a portico for your amusement and your fissured and warty biome-busy solipsistic landforms. Page turn in the wind. I don't want your Bisquick sustenance, the party-colored borders between me and you, some eco-twittered mastication of self, salt water and elementary particles. Your greasy baster injects my sorry canticles with lassoed protoplasm. I'm a borrower of furrows in the forests of your phylacteries. Nature, because of you, a profusion of fission-ready midget fighting league lions are ready to frack my Orinoco-infused, hashtag-rich, limb jungle vein doilies, rendering the Antarctic taxidermy of my soul's subterranean knife block a geodesic Isaac Brock triumph of isometric 1812 plate tectonic platitudes. I hate you, nature. You emulate the tusk of my finger holes and leave me parking. Thank you. Of course, you're going to tell me now that the connection died and I have to do that again, but but my neighbors are like, oh, yeah, there he goes.
Anyway,
thank
Gary,
you very much.
It's strange to hear you. So the first time I ever met you was you reading that, and you were super saturated from that rainstorm, which was not just rain, it was thunder, it was lightning, and we arrived at Spadina and Bloor, and you were on those dominoes, and you were soaked. Super soaked. So it's strange to hear you read that. That poem, and there's blue skies behind you, so
my hate can extend to all things. Blue skies, trees, blue, yeah, I hate multitudes. Yeah.
We will open it up for questions for the next 15 minutes. Again, if you want to raise your virtual digital hand or put it in the chat room, I can read it on your behalf. I was wondering, as people think of a question perhaps, this is National Poetry Month. Mm-hmm. And let alone that, so there's more poetry out there and being recognized as such. But with the pandemic, do you think, I don't know, in terms of clocking it, but I'm kind of noticing that more people are gravitating towards poetry, are reading poetry, or talking about it. Any thoughts?
It feels like that. I mean, of course, I'm just in my little literary bubble, so I also thought people were going to vote on the far left in every election. But I think so. I mean, I guess people turn. I mean, I think whatever things poetry does, it first of all, I think it really is about connection. But I mean, it's all. I mean, certainly there's a part of consolation and hope and inspiration. There's that kind of poetry, but and also grounding you in expression and in how you're feeling and what a moment feels like. And I think we're struggling to find out what this moment feels like, what like in terms of a narrative and what we're going through and what we're going through together. So I think that in that way it's consoling, even if it doesn't it doesn't make things better, except by helping you identify how you're feeling, helping you identify how other people are feeling, and being able to I guess share that communication. I mean, that's the thing that I think is that's kind of that's a profound thing that we humans do. Like that's what I was talking about conscious community and connection. I think that's what poetry can do. And also I think people struggle to find a way to express their own feelings too. And I think poem is one way to do that. And the other thing I think why it's also particularly relevant now also is that words are tricky and slippery, and they're used in tricky and slippery ways more and more. And I think poetry investigates what do words mean and how can they be used in for us, against us, and in tricky ways, and to manipulate us, to make us emotional. And so to look at what that is, I think is a really important kind of media awareness, language awareness. It's an incredibly language is an incredibly powerful thing in good hands, and so poetry is always aware of its poetryness, of the fact that it's made out of language. And so I think that's another reason why people are looking to poetry, I think, as that kind of a kind of confirmation and guidance of both those things.
Right. Thank you. There is a question from Laura. Laura, I've got you unmuted.
Hi, Gary. I asked a similar question to one of the previous authors, and I wrote down the phrase that you used, conscious connections, of making those through your writing. And I guess I posed the question to you on this Earth Day, and in a very unique situation or time in our lives right now too, as to maybe what reflections have you made on those conscious connections this Earth Day, which is, I think, very different than previous ones since we're all at home more. And if you had any new connections that you've sort of been seeing in your own community, those different links to nature that maybe you haven't seen before.
Well, one thing I think is that because there's things that we're not able to do or that we're missing, that we think about them more, and we realize how much we value them. Simple walk into the conservation area or out just someplace that we're not allowed to go, so I think so there's that, and then kind of a sharing of that, of missing that together, of realizing the how important that is. So I think there's that kind of community around that. And I think also people in general are missing both are understanding that this is profoundly something that we do together. We fight COVID-19 by collective action, and so there's that is a conscious community. It's a conscious community decision, and which is also, I think, it's in the people's mind that, oh yeah, that's also how we would work against how protect the planet, how we work against the climate crisis, and look, it is conceivably possible that we might be able to come together in this way. I mean, and similarly, like capitalism and all of the things that are implicated in both nature as well as current society, and I guess and the way the world is. So despite much evidence to the contrary, I do think there's also evidence to support that things that people want to change. People are having a community of belief, of commitment, of hope, of imagination. I think I mean nature in the grandest sense of like trees and forests and the air, the climate, as well as the people, like people's health, because it's all interwoven. And I think that people are really particularly reflecting on that. I feel during this whole quarantine, it feels like that's something that's been very much on people's mind. I mean, other than the people, the haircuts and the open up the malls or whatever there's always that. But I think that's a small and overrepresented by the media group of people. I think people are hoping that that there can be change. And I think when it comes down to it, they remember what were important. I mean, it's like those things when they ask a kindergarten kid, what do you think? And they tell, I think people are remembering some of that because everything is slowed down enough to remember that, and they remember what they're missing, I think.
Thank you.
There's a question from Susan. She asks, so nature inside and outside. Gary,
Yes.
How do you tap into your own intuition in order to create poetry of the natural world?
I think, when I teach writing or when I teach anything, I think that's exactly what it's about. It's about being trusting that your own impulses and that by listening to the language, I always tell students that the writing knows more than you do, which means that if you listen to the resonance of the language, of the words and the memory in the words and the way they can be constructed, it leads you somewhere, like kind of like dowsing for water. It just, you follow that kind of, you follow the twitching. I should have that as a little sign up on my door. But so that I mean, you trust those impulses that you don't know where it's going, but then that's a kind of creative intuition where you don't set out to have a conscious idea. I am going to say this, and this is what this poem will be about. Rather that you open up to listening and to follow that kind of twitching, that kind of dowsing and follow the language in whatever you're making, whether you're writing or creating music. I think then you have access to a creativity that's larger than your little ego. I mean, I feel like my ego is a small little worry little animal, and if I trust my sense of self that's larger than that, that's the I contain multitudes sort of thing. You can sort of tap through this gift of language that we have. We can hear all the little ripples and little seismic vibrations all through the language for everybody who's sort of ever used the language or anything that we've ever noticed or read. We have access to that, which is obviously far larger than just I'm going to sit down and write a great poem and everybody's going to think I'm smart, or whatever you do.
And I think this is going to be the final question. Bill has written, Gary and Shel Silverstein. And he asks, Gary, Gary, I think you should write for the trees. Could you give us a spontaneous line or two in the rough?
Oh, right. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, well, it's, I'm gonna avoid this question doing this.
I'm sorry, we're out of time.
But it is really interesting. I mean, there's a whole area of eco arts, right? Trying to think about what would writing be that's not for humans. It's not written by humans, or it's not spoken by humans. And what would that look like? I can think of. I mean, there's all sorts of examples of. Here's a silly example, but it's a beautiful example. There's a writer, Sasha Archer, who lives in Burlington. He does all these images where he dips trees in ink and lets the wind as they move, and then so the trees write on. It's like really beautiful, right? It's like it's tracking the movement of the trees, right? And they're writing, right? I mean, and there's something really so lovely about that. And the other thing I always think about, John Cage says, imitating nature in its manner of operation. So it's not using human language. It's somehow the process by which we would create work would be like the process of the way the tree would grow. So I guess I could just, what I should do is sit here enigmatically for 70 years, Bill, and then that'll be my my tree poem slowly. And also think how full of sap I am, and how much the squirrels give me too. That's the other important aspect of it.
I love it that you circled back to the squirrels.
It seems to be an ongoing obsession. There's squirrels everywhere. There's tons of birds this spring, as well as tons of squirrels. I don't know what's happening. I have seen no dolphins swimming in the streets of Hamilton. Any squirrels. Can't return.
I'm glad that I'm so glad that we found you in a good spot in your yard, Gary. My face is actually quite sore from smiling and laughing. So I want I have an idea of you for a weekend at the Canadian Ecology Center, and that is I'm not even sure if a weekend is going to be enough time. So that will happen. We will come together. Although this has been, I hope for everyone out there also a feel of connection. And so I want to say first that our next session is at 8 o'clock with novelist Christine Fisher-Guy discussing her book, The Umbrella Mender, which is set in Moose Factory in the 1950s during the tuberculosis epidemic. Pre-registration is required as it is a different Zoom ID number than this meeting. But in the meantime, I hope that everyone finds a safe outdoor sit spot to reflect on Gary's words and thoughts, and from evolution, conscious connection, the poetry, the sidewalk, the dog, the shopping cart, the deer. There's so much to think about. So I thank you so much, Gary, for sharing all of that with us, and I thank all of you for participating. I have all, you know what? There's always something I forget to do. So before I close off, I'm going to do that copy and paste into the chat room, which says really important stuff, which says sort of what I just said, which was, I hope you enjoyed. This is 5th of 7. So for me to forget one thing per session, I think is pretty darn good. It's at 8:30. No, it's 8 o'clock. That's wrong. Don't read what I just wrote. This is good. See, another mistake. I'm so infallible. So 8 o'clock, and this is a fundraiser. So if you had a good time, please donate to the Education Foundation. And again, thank you very much. And now I will do that closing of the door and ending the meeting.
Thank you, everybody. It was nice to talk with you, to you, at you.
Thank you, Gary. Bye-bye.